Our next testimony is from Lizzie, who is from Los Angeles in America, and she has come to Ireland for the purpose of the school visits and tonight's event. So Lizzie is just 24 years of age and a professional YouTube blogger, providing online videos covering a variety of topics relating to the Catholic faith, relationships and mental health. She's going to speak a little now about her recent conversion to the Catholic faith and her work in spreading the gospel message. So please give Lizzie a warm welcome.
Hey guys, my name is Lizzie. Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you, Father Eamon, for flying me out. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I've been here for almost 2 weeks, and it's absolutely magical. The house that I'm staying at, they literally have sheep and baby lambs living in the backyard, and it's the cutest thing. I've never ever seen sheep before in real life. And then we'll be driving down the road and there's cows just cuddling together and dancing around in these grass mansions. It seems like each cow has 5 square miles to just hang out in. You treat your animals like royalty. And Durin here, who's been watching after me this week, she casually mentioned our first conversation, yeah, I built my own log cabin. So it's been really cute to see everyone's lives, and I absolutely love Catholicism in Ireland. Everyone I've met has been so passionate and serious about the faith, and being here, going to the Youth 2000 retreat, hanging out with Father, everyone I've talked to, I've honestly grown so much in the faith and learned so much more about Catholicism just by knowing all of you guys and spending time together. So thank you for having me. So as Durin said, I run a YouTube channel called LizziesAnswers. I started it when I was just 15 years old, so it's been 9 years. I went to an arts high school for creative writing, film, TV production, and speech and debate. And that's where I really got passionate about video editing. I never ever considered being a YouTuber, making videos, but once I got to high school, that became a huge passion of mine. My family is Protestant, and we've always been really, really serious about the faith. They were actually missionaries in St. Petersburg, Russia for 5 years. So for the first part of my life, we lived in Russia, and then we moved back to the States, and we moved quite a bit growing up, but Christianity was the most important part of our lives. When I went to college, I attended a Church of Christ university called Pepperdine. I studied philosophy, and there was a trend from the first semester of my freshman year of philosophy students who were Church of Christ, who grew up like me, converting into Catholicism. And I thought it was the most mental thing, because the way I grew up, it just seemed that Catholicism did not go by the Bible. There was a lot of stigma in my church growing up. We thought that Catholics were going to hell because they were not properly baptized. We did full immersion of teenagers and adults, and they also talked about how Catholics worshipped Mary, worshipped statues, worshipped the Pope. There's just so much stigma towards the Catholic faith, and so when I saw people in my college becoming Catholic, I never for a moment considered that it could be true. So my junior year of college, I started feeling really exhausted every day. I would wake up from really vivid dreams, and regardless of how much I slept, I always felt really, really tired. I kind of felt my motivation declining. I didn't have an appetite, and I lost weight really fast, and I had no idea what was going on. Eventually, one of my roommates directed me to go to the therapist office, and I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. It was so bizarre because I'd always heard about depression being sadness and being insecurity and hopelessness. But for me, it was not caused by anything, and it was just a physical and mental experience of complete fatigue, not being able to think of words to say, and just feeling like my brain was shutting down. I absolutely loved school so much. It was my favorite thing my entire life, and I had so much fun in college debating in philosophy group discussions, and in my religion classes I learned Greek, the language of the Bible. I learned all about the first century culture, interpreting the Bible. parts of church history. I was just so passionate about school. And so when I went into depression, it was this horrible experience where I was in all these classes that I should have been so passionate about and flourishing in, but my brain was broken and I couldn't enjoy those classes. I eventually went on medication and it took several months to kick in, but I went off my meds later in the year because I wanted to kind of just handle it by myself, which was a big mistake, and the depression continued through the next year of college. I failed a lot of classes, and I felt like God had completely abandoned me. I had no feeling in my relationship with God, and I couldn't understand why God would let me go through such a long desert period in my faith where I couldn't feel Him at all and couldn't even think of how to pray. Later in the year, I was re-diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and the hardest thing was that a lot of people in my life didn't believe that I had depression. They thought I was making it up. They thought it wasn't real, because on the outside, I would always be happy and full of energy, but internally, I had so much despair. So kind of a year after my depression, a year into having depression, there were a few things that happened in the US that super rocked my faith. There was a YouTuber named Christina Grimmie who she basically made music videos covering songs, sharing personal music, and she was shot and murdered at a meet and greet for one of her concerts. The next morning, I woke up and there was a shooting in Orlando, 3 hours from where I lived, and dozens of people were murdered in a nightclub. And I remember thinking of the past year of having depression and then seeing these two violent, traumatic events, and I didn't want to believe in God. I couldn't understand how a just God, a merciful God, would let people be murdered, would let people suffer with mental illness. And so I got to a point where I didn't want God to exist. It wasn't just that I was angry with God, but I was so hurt from God, and it seemed so much easier for God to not exist than to try to reconcile all the pain in the world with God. Because I was a philosophy major in college and even in high school, I discovered early on a lot of really strong arguments for the existence of God and the existence of the resurrection. So even though emotionally I wanted to leave my faith, intellectually I couldn't. I saw so many arguments in the intricacies of the way the world was created, in how each of us have so many emotions, creativity, passion, intellect, things that cannot be confined to just neural pathways in the brain. I saw how all scholars, atheist scholars, attest to the life and historicity of Christ. And I saw these eyewitness accounts in the Gospels of Jesus' apostles who saw the resurrection and were willing to die for it. So even though emotionally I wanted to leave the faith, I couldn't. So around this time, like I said, a lot of people in my college were becoming Catholic. There was kind of a last straw moment for me where one of my friends, not in the philosophy department, but actually studying religion, getting a master's in religion, told me that he was becoming Catholic. A lot of my friends in college who were converting, they had a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a best friend or an ex. They were connected to it emotionally, and I always saw them as being biased, as emotionally converting. But the last person who I saw convert didn't know anyone who was Catholic, and even told me that he didn't want to convert and he didn't want to be Catholic. So I was at this point where I didn't want to be a Christian. I felt so abandoned by God, and all of my self-esteem and worth that I found in being intellectual and academia was destroyed. God broke me down all the way. I didn't have anything. I felt like I lost a lot of my faith. Everything I knew growing up seemed to be gone. And so I was at a point where he'd broken me down all the way. I was nothing, and that was the only way I was able to be humble enough and open enough to leaving Protestantism and finding Catholicism to be true. A lot of people who saw my conversion story on YouTube applaud my decision and think I'm so brave and intellectual and amazing for converting, but it was quite the opposite. I was really stubborn. I hated Catholicism. I believed so strongly that I was right, that I knew so much about Christianity, and God had to just tear me down to this awful English until I was even open to looking into it. So I started reading a lot about church history. My Protestant church growing up super emphasized that they went by the Bible and lived by the teachings of the early church. And this seems so logical. If Jesus taught the faith to the apostles, and there's other documents from those first Christians talking about how they interpreted the Bible, how the early Christian communities lived, it seems like reading the writings of the first Christians is the best bet to understand how Jesus wants us to form the church. So I started reading the church fathers, Irenaeus, Ignatius, Pope Clement, Justin Martyr, all of these people, and I discovered so quickly that the early church believed in the real presence of the Eucharist. They had bishops leading the church. They had different types of baptism, not just full immersion, but they had pouring water and infant baptism, and all of this was going on in the first century. It was so crazy to me because my whole life and in college, I thought I had all of this knowledge about Christianity, but then within a few weeks, I just read such simple quotations from the early church, and I realized that I was wrong about everything. It was a really awful experience. It was an even more dying to myself because I had to accept that I didn't know everything, that I wasn't intelligent, and that I'd been really prideful for years and years. I was angry at God that I had to hurt my family with it. I put off telling my parents for 7 months from when I knew I would convert. I knew that it would just destroy them, break them so much emotionally, hurt them, and I just hated that God put me in a situation where I would have to emotionally stab the people that I love the most. I remember praying some days that I would wake up the next day and Catholicism wouldn't be true because it was too painful to leave the faith community that I loved. When I was in college, I spent each summer living in Bangkok, Thailand, doing missions work. I would teach English with the Bible and work with a church there. I became like best friends, family with that church community, and my plan throughout college was going to be to move to Thailand after I graduated and be a missionary there. But when my depression hit, I took a year off to go home, which is when I started researching into Catholicism. And I had to make the decision to give up being a missionary, to give up my dream of living in Thailand, and instead to enroll in RCIA. It was a really humbling experience going from being a religion major, doing so much ministry, leading ministry my entire life, and then having to sit in a classroom and just listen to a priest tell me about the Catholic Church. A few months into RCIA, I finally told my parents about my conversion. I wrote them a 10,000-word document about all my reasons for converting, and I emailed it to them, and they didn't respond for a few days. I'm glad you guys are laughing at my pain. Once they finally responded, my dad said something really dramatic that he meant. He said that learning that I was in RCIA was akin to me being in a horrible car accident and being in the emergency room unit and about to die. That's how he felt about Catholicism, that it wasn't Christianity, that my faith was in jeopardy. And my dad was always the closest person in my life. I was so close to my family. We connected intellectually, theologically, always having conversations about the Bible. And my dad couldn't talk to me for several months. It hurt him too much that I'd hid it from my parents for so long. I remember just crying and feeling so awful and helpless and mad at God that I had to hurt my parents in that way. I got a lot of pushback from my friends as well. In America, It's a lot more liberal than in Ireland. And when I told my friends that in Catholicism we don't have women priests and that I don't want to change the church, when I told them that I will not use birth control if I get married, when I told them that I even agree with the church's teachings against gay marriage, they called me out. They said I was sexist. They said I was a bigot. They hated my views. And it's so hard being a 24-year-old in such a liberal country on a public platform and having to share the church's teachings in a way where I get a lot of attack. The sexual ethics are one of my favorite part of Catholicism and what I found the most compelling and honestly the most important in our world right now. Saving sex for marriage was something always taught in my churches, and it's something I've stuck to in every relationship. And it's something that all of my friends in youth group and college also said they would do, but every single one of my friends caved and ended up having sex in their relationship. And it was really sad that everyone who'd promised that with me and wanted to hold that so strongly failed at it. And when I started learning the Catholic teaching, it made sense. In Protestantism, we learn that sex is only meant to be unitive in a marriage, but Catholicism says that it's procreative and unitive, that every sex act is both. And that is what it takes for young people growing up to understand to save sex for marriage. If it's literally only unitive in a relationship, that's not a good enough argument for people to not save for marriage. But knowing that the Catholic Church believes that sex, family, and marriage are all interconnected and intertwined is the most important building block for society and for a successful church. So I've shared my whole conversion on YouTube. I've seen when I've uploaded certain videos, the demographics where thousands of people will immediately unsubscribe upon watching. I've also gotten new viewers to my videos. I've had a lot of liberal, Protestant, atheist viewers see my story, be affected by it. I read messages every day of people becoming Catholic because of my videos, and even in my personal life, I've seen two of my friends from college who are now looking into Catholicism because of my conversion journey, and I pray every day for my family, for my best friends to become Catholic as well. Every time I go to Mass, I cry when I see the Eucharist because my entire life I had such a love for God and I was so content and joyful in Christianity, and discovering that there's so much more of Christianity on earth, that we have the fellowship of the saints, that I'm able to pray to be taken care of and known by the Christians who came before us, being able to read the writings of 2,000 years of the church, being able to be so encouraged reading papal encyclicals, knowing I can go to my priest and bishop for truth, not just 30,000 different interpretations of the Bible, but something that I know is objectively true. When I have depression episodes and bipolar and cannot feel God's existence, being Catholic is a whole different story, because I go to Mass, I kneel before the crucifix, and I look up and remember that when Jesus was on the cross and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus experienced the exact same emotions that I experience when I'm in depression. He lived it and he felt it. And the whole point of Christianity is that God does not promise us comfort, but he tells us it's going to be hard, it's going to be painful, it's going to involve sacrifice. But we look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. I'm going to end reading a Bible verse from 2 Corinthians, and I think it really relates to my struggle with depression and bipolar disorder. So Paul says, "To keep me from being too prideful, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, to harass me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I begged the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. I will all the more gladly boast of my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. The Eucharist is why I became Catholic, why I converted, why I strained my relationship with my families, why I gave up moving to Thailand, why I was willing to lose subscribers, risk friendships. The fact that Jesus came down as a physical person, but not just for the first century generation, but for all of us, that all of us can be so intimately connected with Christ, that the unity of the cross is not just this metaphorical, emotional reality, but it's physical. All of us are physically the body of Christ. It's so amazing going to Mass and having this moment where heaven meets earth, where the worship on earth is the same as the worship in heaven. I long so much for being fully united with God and with the saints in heaven, and I feel so supported and taken care of in the faith in a way I never felt in Protestantism. I'm so hopeful going forward that even if I don't feel God's existence and go through desert periods in my faith, that's not going to affect my belief in God and my belief in Christianity, because I have everyone who's gone before me and everyone surrounding me to keep me grounded in God. Thank you so much for listening.